Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to the Imago Nutrition Podcast. My name is Mark. I am one of your co-hosts, along with Danielle, and we are back together after a couple episodes. You flew solo, right? So thanks for doing that, Danielle. How are things up in your neck of the woods if you're listening for the first time? I'm down in Nashville, and Danielle is up in the St. Louis area. So when I say how are things up your way, that's what I mean. But how are y'all doing as we truck through this November as we're recording this?
We are good. We are still adjusting to the fallback time change. And I saw as head of an article that I wanted to read, like sleep experts want to get rid of daylight savings. I'm totally for that.
I am too.
It like messes your whole body up. Like if you're really regimented of when you go to sleep, when you eat. My kids are just like hungry at 4 p.m. now, and I'm like, we can't eat at 4 p.m.
I think the older I've gotten, I used to sort of like not be put off by it. I'm like, whatever, just keep trucking through. It's hours. It's not blah, blah, blah. But the more and more I have studied like things like neuroscience, circadian rhythm, the connection between light and your eyes, which are an extension of your brain. You start to get into some of that fascinating research. You're like, dang, it has impact. In fact, I was on a client call yesterday and we were talking about that too. She was like, I'm just trying to get adjusted. So, and I'm a big proponent of circadian rhythm and light, both in the morning and at very least as the sun goes down, it just aligns and then you shift all that. And we know how important sleep is, right? I even saw a headline. In fact, my client had brought it up as well, that they recommend getting like 2 additional hours of sleep. This once the clocks get set back, and we generally recommend 7 to 9 hours of sleep to all our clients, right? And so it's perhaps no coincidence that sleep experts are saying, you might want to be perhaps on the higher end of that during this time of year. So yeah, it's crazy, but it's weird. I think America's over it. I think we're done. I also learned that it wasn't started. I haven't researched this, but someone was telling me, so I shouldn't say I've learned. I heard that if you trace the roots back, it actually goes back to World War I. It was not an agricultural consideration. In fact, many people in agricultural systems were opposed to it early on. So it had more to do with hours and production during World War I and factories and that sort of stuff. So fascinating stuff that maybe I should read up on before I bring it up on the podcast. But so I think there's a lot of misnomers, like many things, as to why we're still doing this. Because I don't think the farmers in the middle of the country are like, dang, if we could just set the clocks back, everything would be great. So well, on that note, this is, as I said, the Imago Nutrition Podcast, where we bring you practical nutrition strategies so that you and your family can flourish. And today's going to be a little different. Okay, so Danielle agreed to jump on a podcast with me without notes, without outline. And admittedly, I've just got a little bit of a bone to pick, and I just want to kind of do it openly and then have Danielle's gracious and kind response to all my ranting to temper me a bit perhaps on this topic. But we still love hearing from you. We still like to focus on answering questions from people, though today will be a little different. So if you have a question for us in regards to anything related to nutrition, health, wellness, even fitness, we would love to hear from you. You can go over to imagonutrition.com/podcast. There's a form you can fill out real quick, hit submit. It will send your question our way. We will consider it as a topic for a future episode. So that said, today's going to be a little different. Thank you, Danielle, for agreeing to put up with me for the next, 20 minutes or so on a bit of a bone-picking mission here. And so here's what I want to say. And if you're listening to the podcast or you're watching on YouTube, you saw the title. Okay, so you kind of know where this is going. I have a bit of a bone to pick with, and again, in the nicest way, like I'm not mad at anyone, right? This is just about the free marketplace of ideas. But whether it be vegans, whether it be plant-based people, vegetarians, whether it be restaurants, whether it be marketers, whether it be product companies or supplement companies, my bone to pick is that we as a culture are confusing 2 terms. Okay. And it's not just me being pedantic and wanting to rant about something. I actually think it matters, and we'll talk about that. Okay. So Danielle, here's what I'm proposing. I'm proposing that we as a society have to stop using the terms vegan and plant-based interchangeably. Okay. I have seen this. We've seen this in the rise of veganism, and we just did a podcast on carnivorism, right? So don't think we're just picking on vegans. Okay. And by the way, we've never had more comments on our YouTube, our small little startup YouTube channel, than when we posted a video about carnivorism, because all the carnivores apparently came out and started commenting. So if you want a little entertainment, head over to our YouTube, take a look at the carnivore video and read through some of the comments. It's all in good fun. We love hearing from folks, even if they're wrong. All right. So real quick, again, I think we have to, and as nutrition practitioners, I think we have to lead in this regard. We have to be very clear about the words that we choose and how we use them. And so I sort of have this growing frustration, though I'm not very super grumpy, but I'm not a grumpy person, but I do have this frustration with these two terms being used interchangeably. And so, Danielle, my first question to you is, do you see that? Am I overblowing it? Does it not really register? Or are people doing it on purpose? Or what are your thoughts on just my initial thought that we've got to stop using those terms interchangeably? We kind of talk about what those terms are in a second here, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that I don't know if I've necessarily realized people using the terms interchangeably, because I haven't asked the second question, which you probably are. I mean, yeah. So they'll, I haven't had a client recently. So when you have a client, then you get to ask, okay, what does that mean to you? What foods are you eating? But some people will just mention that, in passing, and then you're not having a further conversation. So then I don't really know what they mean. So I think I was not aware of this. And so if I had more of these clients, then maybe I would, be able to see how people are using these terms. But yeah, I think there is a difference for sure between.
Yeah. I was just going to say, and where I see it again, what I often see, it's not anyone, definitely not anyone do anything malicious, right? Like there's not a single malintent or like, there's no one doing this like on purpose, like for some devious reason. What I see most often is people saying, oh, this plant-based meal, or they've got, it's a caption on social media about a plant-based lifestyle, but then you click on it and it's a vegan account. Right. And they're talking about plant-based when it's a bit of like, that's a little bit more of a popular term than veganism. So we're just kind of like leaning into that to make it a little bit more palatable for the common culture, because very small percentage of people, of course, identify as vegans or adhere to that lifestyle or, diet. And so, and it might be that like, it's like you buy a car and you start seeing it everywhere. So I hope I haven't like ruined this for you. And now you like start to, go around seeing this, all the places that I see it, but I do see it quite a bit and I hear it quite a bit. And here's kind of the rub. So, well, one, let's talk about definitions real fast. So veganism in general, I don't have, again, no notes on this episode. So I'm just kind of winging it. Okay. So veganism is the complete exclusion from a nutrition perspective. I know there's a whole lifestyle, ethics, sustainability, all those things are swirling right in the ethos about, or in the air about these things. But from a nutrition perspective, veganism is the exclusion of any and all animal products from your food, from your diet. Okay. Plant-based, I would say, is based on plants, but does not exclude animal foods. Okay. So I think words matter. And if I came up to someone, or you came up to me, Danielle, and said, hey, you seem like a fairly fit guy for being in your 40s, you're getting older, but kind of still holding on to a bit of this whole fitness thing. What are you doing? I say, well, I adhere to a strength-based fitness regimen. Now, what I didn't say and what you didn't hear was, Danielle, I never do cardio. Never, ever. I'm excluding it entirely, dogmatically, never. I play soccer. I played an hour-long soccer game yesterday. But if you asked me in a nugget, what is my protocol? I would say it's strength-based. Doesn't mean I don't do cardio, okay? But it's based on strength training, okay? So those are kind of the definition. Is that how you see it as well? Did I at least on a whim sort of define the terms appropriately?
Yeah, so I would say vegan is no animal products. Plant-based is some animal products.
Some animal products. I like that. Yep. Mm-hmm. And again, there's a whole debate. Like if you use the word predominantly, what percentage is that? How often are you consuming meat? What other, people get into all that. This isn't the conversation for that. I want to kind of take broad strokes with this topic. But you're right. Like plant-based does not mean vegan, or else we wouldn't need another term to describe vegan. Okay. So vegan is no animal products. I like the way you said it very concisely. And plant-based is some. That's a great way. I like that. I'm going to use that.
Very concise girl here.
Yes. Me, on the other hand, I will draw this out for 88 minutes. So we agree in general on those general terms. Okay, we're not going to get into all the specifics of that, but predominantly, or some of these other ways that people frame it, that's for debate. But I like how you said it. Vegan is no, plant-based is some when it comes to animal products. Okay. So then the question is this: why does it matter? Mark, why on earth are you doing an entire episode on this? Why does this bug you? Why do you see this in places? Why does it poke at your bear inside, right? And here's why. I would like to try to frame this in a virtuous manner. It's not just because I'm, like I said, trying to be pedantic, or I'm trying to govern the words that people use. You're a full-grown adult. You can say whatever you want. But here's my argument as to why we shouldn't. And this might particularly resonate with people that are far more plant-based, maybe vegetarian, maybe vegan. I actually think it helps your case to make sure that we're clear on these terms. Here's why. Because as I said, words matter. And what seems to be taking the place in common vernacular and common conversation is that people are associating plant-based with vegan. And if they're not vegan, then they think they shouldn't be plant-based, because they're starting to think that those two things are the same. Now, here's what shocks some people, because I'm like out and loud and proud about protein. I'm an omnivore. I love meat. I love steak on an anniversary dinner. I have dairy every morning, right? When people find out, when I say, well, I'm plant-based, they're shocked, right? Because again, they're thinking, wait a minute, no, you eat animal products. I'm like, I know, I'm plant-based. See, you thought that plant-based meant no animal products. And I've gotten that time and time again for 15 plus years now. Okay. So why does it matter? It matters because when people associate plant-based with vegan, they are turned off to the idea that they need to be plant-based. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Danielle. I think you and I agree, and that we coach and counsel people that they should generally consume a plant-based nutritional framework. Do you agree with that? Talk me through that presupposition.
Oh, I mean, well, I thought I was going to come later as far as like what kind of foods we recommend and all the health benefits to eating more plants than animals. And there's lots of ways you can do it. If you look at the plate, like you have protein, you have carbs, fruits and veggies, fats, there's ways to lean towards more of those plants than the animals. So, plant-based proteins, quinoa, edamame, tofu, beans, etc., nuts, carbs, like avoiding those processed carbs that, very far from the plant at that point, it gets to your plate. So sticking with your potatoes and beans and bean and lentil pasta, fruit, squash, whole grains. Obviously, fruits and veggies are plants. And then your fats, instead of using, butter, cream cheese, things like that, often using like nuts, nut butters, avocado, olive oil, avocado oil, those types of things. So I don't remember what your question was, Mark. So
no, that's great.
Didn't even have any notes, so I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's perfect. And yeah, it's this idea that if people are turned off to veganism, which is okay, by the way, for those of you listening, like, I don't at all identify with veganism. I don't believe in it, this, that, and the other. That's okay. But don't let that turn you off to the concept of being plant-based, right? And you were just giving us some super practical, which I love, ways that you can build this up. So like nothing Danielle just said, you should have been like, oh my gosh, I'm opposed to that. Like, no, I can't do that. That's plant-based. It's not an it's not at the exclusion of animal products, right? But it is an increased focus on plants, right? And so every meal I eat, I have more plants as ingredients than I do protein or animals, right? I just made the common mistake, which is I associated the term protein with animal products, which I should not do that ever. And so that's like when I make a bowl, when I make my parfait bowl, right? I've got my non-fat Greek yogurt, but then I've got berries, I've got oats a lot of times, and I have something like chia seeds. Okay, there are 4 ingredients in that bowl. three of which are plants, one of which is animal. That to me is a perfect illustration of a plant-based meal. Okay. And so
one
no
question
matter what
or one thing to,
yeah.
I don't know if this is going to help your point or be against your point, but the point is a conversation, right? So if I was to invite you over, Mark, and say, let's have a plant-based meal, and then I said another time, let's have a vegan meal. Like, I feel like maybe people are using plant-based to get you excited, sounds a little bit more appetizing. I don't know, to be like less scary. I don't know. I think, is that what you're getting at here? Like, or is that the opposite of what you're saying here?
Yeah, like, and again, even within the question, like, I mean, obviously it's a hypothetical, but I would love to get that question, like, from a neighbor, not to be a jerk, but I'd be like, hey, we're doing a plant-based dinner, and then for me to bring a dish that actually has like an animal product in it, but it also has like 6 plant-based. And then I would be shocked at how many people might be like, Mark, like, you violated the rules. I'm like, I think we're defining the game differently, right? Like, I think you thought plant-based meant plant only. That's not what based means. Based means it's a foundation, but it doesn't mean it's at the exclusion of all other things. Again, if my fitness protocol is strength based, it doesn't mean I don't do cardio. It just means that the overwhelming majority, or the majority of what I do, is strength. The hours that I put into my fitness are more so in the strength category than in the cardio. Okay, so same thing. It's like, if I'm stacking 4, 5, 6 ingredients into the plant category, and I've got an animal product in there, to me, that's still plant-based. Now, vegans would say that's not plant-based. Because you're trying to hijack the term, right? And so that's where I think it gets really interesting. And that's why I think it's hurting the case. Because I've got friends that are vegans. I love having conversations with vegans. A lot of them realize they're not going to necessarily convince everyone to be completely vegan, but they want us to consume less of it. And that's a very compelling argument, which I think can actually be made and bore out in many research studies. Okay. And so if you are a vegan or really strict vegetarian or plant-based, whatever you call it, and your goal is to get people to consume less animal products for many reasons, ethical, sustainability, et cetera, you want to be clear about the difference between these. Say, hey, when I'm talking about plant-based, I don't mean vegan. Like, that is so much more disarming than what is currently taking place, which is a lot of confusion with these terms. And that's kind of the bone I'm picking. I think it actually emboldens the case. It gives you more to connect with other people. And then you can kind of work through the details in community, in conversation, close up, right? Like, it's hard to hate people up close. Like, love people, have conversations, sit down, have a meal, talk about these things. Like, for crying out loud, be human, right? But at the end of the day, I think we have to separate these two terms, because so many people are being turned off by this term plant-based because they think it inherently means plant only. And I don't think that's the case. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, and we did touch on this in the carnivore episode, it is unequivocal in research. I mean, I can't even tell you how strong of correlative and causal data we have at the highest levels. We're talking meta-analyses that show point blank, as you increase fruits and veggies, you decrease essentially all negative health outcomes. Doesn't mean you eliminate them. But as you increase fruits and veggies specifically, most of the studies that I've read through are fruits and veggies. We would also say whole grains, nuts and seeds, et cetera, which we'll talk about here in a second. As vegetable and fruit intake goes up, things like all-cause mortality, cancer risk, cardiovascular disease goes down. Now, if you're a vegan and you've read some studies, you're like, oh, but I've seen studies, Mark. If you're so research-based, I've seen studies that show as meat intake goes up, specifically red meat intake goes up, negative health outcomes increase. And I would agree, but here's what you have to do. You have to take a few things into consideration. If you look at the studies where they increase vegetables, fruits, and veggies, you have let's take cancer, for example. In studies related to cancer risk and outcomes and intake, as you increase fruits and veggies, cancer risk decreases, okay? You can also find studies that show as meat increases, specifically red meat increases, and there's a lot about that. There's saturated and saturated fats and processed meats and all sort of stuff. But suffice it to say, there are plenty of studies that show that as meat increases, cancer risk increases. Here's the third point that so many people miss. If you dig into the research and you find the studies where meat increases and fruits and veggies increase, guess what happens? Cancer risk is negated. It goes down at the same rate as the studies that show as you increase fruits and veggies, cancer risk goes down. So all that's to say this, it's not so much about in the inclusion of meat, it's the exclusion of fruits and veggies. Because what you see is that as people increase meat, they're less likely to eat fruits and veggies. But if you parallel path those increases, the cancer risk goes down the same as it did for people with low meat intake. So that's the fascinating nuance in research is that, and I just read another study, I don't have it on hand because we don't have any notes for this episode. But I believe it wasn't even that much fiber. They found that if you consume 500 grams of less of red meat per week, and you simply adhere to 20 grams of fiber per day, which is lower than what we would recommend for pretty much anyone, to be honest, normally more up toward the 30s, right? That offsets any risk from the 500 grams of red meat per week by consuming 20 grams, at least 20 grams of fiber per day. So again, it's not so much about the inclusion of the meat, it's about the exclusion of fiber. It's the exclusion of plant-based sources. So all that said and done, someone comes to me and says, fruits and veggies go up, cancer risk goes down. Yes. Meat intake goes up, cancer risk goes up. Yes. But then I say meat increases and fruits and veggies go up, cancer risk goes down. Because it's about the inclusion of the plant-based sources, not the exclusion of the meat. And so all that's to say, that's just a little bit of a nerd moment in this episode, but it's fascinating to dig through, how these plant sources, these plant foods are so powerful, even in an omnivorous nutrition framework, which I adhere to. Okay. So I think that's kind of the crux. And so on that, you had mentioned a couple practical takeaways, which I think were super helpful. I would say also, if you want to look more into this, from our perspective, we teach something we call the 4 pillars of nutrition. Okay. I'll go over those real quick, but you can go to our website. Just go to imagonutrition.com. This is free, right? Go into the menu and just tap 4 pillars. In our navigation, there's a 4 pillars tab. You can go and read in more detail about the nutrients that are provided in these foods. And we actually give you examples, like food by food. We give you practical examples of these food categories. But we teach what we call the 4 pillars of nutrition, okay? So now don't think of this as rank, like this is the number 1 thing you have to eat the most of, and then the number 2 thing you eat, right, and then 3, and then 4. We just have them in this order. I'll show you why. So instead of thinking of it as like a rank order, think of it as a little bit more like a pyramid, okay? And so the first one, the first pillar as we call it, is lean meat, seafood, and dairy. Okay.
I thought you were talking about more so like 4 walls of a house, because if you think of pyramid, a lot of people go back to the old food pyramid.
Yeah, it's true. And that's been debunked. They don't even teach that anymore. Yeah. So 4 walls of a house. I like that. Or 4 pillars that hold this up. That's why we use the term. That's why we don't have like a pyramid graphic, Yeah. But at the end of the day, I want you to think about, as I describe it, like these quote, the lower pillars, or the in sequence is kind of hard because we're just listing them in 4 things. I'm trying to like kind of emphasize some. But all that's to say, our 4 pillars are lean meat, seafood, and dairy. And again, if you want specific examples of what we mean by that, it's on the webpage. Second is fruits and veggies, all of them. If they're safe for human consumption, they're not considered toxic, right? Eat them, a lot of them, as often as you'd like, okay? So lean meat, seafood, and dairy, fruits and veggies, all of them, and that includes beans, legumes, lentils, etc. Okay. Number 3 is whole grains. Tons of research on the benefit of whole grains. People often forget that. Okay. And then number 4 is nuts and seeds. Okay. So again, lean meat, seafood, and dairy, fruits and veggies, whole grains, nuts and seeds. If you consume foods in those 4, most often 85, 90, 95% of the time, with room for fun foods, with room for, more processed foods, this, that, and the other, you will see dramatic changes in your health. These four pillars are fueling so many of the functions of our body and our physiology. We could go through each one and show you the massive benefits from each of these, but all that's to say, that's a very practical way to begin thinking about how you're stacking up these nutritions. Now, on that note, keep in mind, pillar one has animals. Yes, it's okay. From my perspective, from an omnivore's perspective, from a nutrition science perspective, it's okay. Notice that the other three are plants. 3-1 in our pillars, you have more plants than you do animals, okay? And keep in mind, when we say fruits and veggies, that's like thousands of things, right? There's just like hundreds and hundreds of fruits, hundreds of plants, right, around the world. Like, so each one of these, they may sound simple, but they're so vast. So even we hope that we're modeling for you, even in our 4 pillars, which is not a diet, by the way, it's a way to begin focusing your food intake, that 3 of the 4 are actually from plants, right? And then, yes, we allow for some animal products, some lean meat, some seafood, some dairy. It's awesome. Okay, I had salmon last night. It was incredible, right? Some immaculate food. By the grace of God, that has so much nutrients, incredible, right? But also had potatoes, also had salad, right? And so every sandwich I make has more plants than animals. Every parfait bowl that I make has more plant ingredients than it does animals. Every dinner and lunch, right, that we make has more plants than it does animals. That's what it means to be plant-based, but it doesn't mean you have to be vegan. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that? The rant at the end of the rant.
It's great. It's great. I think that what I was going to say is sometimes people that are afraid of carbs would be afraid of being plant-based. You know, if you think about all of our plants, there's a lot of carbs. Like, for example, we had 2 bean meals, I don't know, call it Meatless Monday, but the past 2 meals we've had for dinner have been, you know, beans. And I just kind of thought about it when I was sitting down. I was like, someone would really not prefer this meal if they're afraid of carbs, that carbs cause you to gain weight. Mm-hmm. So not being afraid of carbs would be, you know, one of my tips if you're wanting to be plant-based, working through those feelings and talking to us about how that's not true. You don't gain weight when you eat more carbs. And I guess thinking about something that was often forgotten as spices and herbs, garlic, cooking with garlic and onion, that's adding plants. There's a lot of plant compounds that are great for your health within your spices and herbs and garlic and onion. And then I think just like utilizing recipes, we need to learn how to cook these foods. And I think that's a big deterrent for most people is it doesn't taste good to them because they haven't had time to practice ways to cook it in multiple different ways too. So
that's so true. That's so true. Yeah, just thinking practically about it, you know, begin taking a look at the, you know, the food you consume. And again, if anything, just for other omnivores listening to this, right, is just to remember that you are justified, and we would say it is entirely worthwhile to focus on that. Doesn't mean you're excluding, but to focus, right? Because again, the literature, the research would show that as that is increased, these plant sources are increased in your nutrition, doesn't mean you're excluding animals, but as you're increasing, preferring more of, you know, fruits and veggies, whole grains, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, love that, right? We're going to see positive impact on your health, and it doesn't require becoming a vegetarian. It doesn't require being a vegan. If you want to be those things, that's fine. That's okay, right? But just know that for the omnivores, okay, and the carnivores, that's a different world. We tackled that, right? But for the omnivores, there's a healthy focus. You are free, and we would say it is good to focus more and more on those plant sources. And then, like in, you know, many cultures where they see the longest, you know, living people, think of those dairies as it's an honor to have, you know, access to some animal products. They're expensive, to be honest. There's a lot of places in the world where that's a big issue. But we see things like in the Mediterranean diet where they view red meat as like a celebratory food, right? It's not like an everyday sort of thing. It's like a celebratory. Like my wife and I, we have steak every anniversary. That's our thing. We love going out. We don't have steak every day. I love steak, but it's like a celebration, right? And so it's a very healthy balance to be focusing more on the plants while allowing for the animals. Again, I have animal products every day. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say I go entire days without, but I at least have some dairy. Again, had seafood yesterday. Maybe some lean cuts of meat. We might have red meat once a week-ish. I don't know. We're not super strict on inventorying these things. We just have a sense over the years of kind of what works for our family. And we've got 3 kids, and so we've got all that consideration. My wife does a great job, knowing that I've got all this nutrition stuff in my head. We've got these kids. We've got, choices and foods and schedules and soccer and all sort of stuff. But so all that's to say, place a healthy focus on plants. But know that doesn't have to be at the exclusion of animal products if you don't want it to be. So, but I love what you said too, because I think as we think through this, there's some things that even I hadn't thought about, that when people hear that, it's like this big alarm bell of like, oh my gosh, that's just so much carbs, and carbs are bad. And that's a topic for another day. They're not bad. They're incredible, and they don't cause weight gain, right? Or fat gain, I should say. Like, you may eat a carb-rich meal and the scale may pop real quick. That's just because for every gram of carbohydrate, you have like 2 or 3 grams of water that come with it. It's just water weight. It doesn't mean you're storing additional pounds of fat in one meal by any means. So anyways, all that's to say, it's been fun. You survived your first kind of rant episode with me. Any final thoughts? And thanks for the practical tips, both, kind of in the middle of the episode where we kind of worked through some practical ways to think through that. Even just some of the cooking stuff at the end of the day, we've got the 4 pillars there for you. So again, head over to imagonutrition.com and tap on the menu and tap on 4 pillars, and you can kind of explore those 4 pillars a little bit more. But any concluding thoughts, Danielle, as we wrap this slightly different episode up?
No, it's been fun.
All right, very cool. Well, as always, if this has been helpful, we would love for you to share it. We would love for you to drop us a review. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. And as I said, if you share it with some friends, that's one way that we love to help as many people as possible for free. If you're on social media, you can follow us at Imago Nutrition. That's IMAGO Nutrition across all the major social media platforms. And as always, we'd like to thank the band Happy Pill for our theme song, Thinkin Bout Food. We'll talk to you next time.